Well, I'm traveling the province a lot as a part of my job, but in particular right now, what we're hearing from a lot of Nova Scotians is that they feel pretty taken by surprise post-election by many of the things that this government has subsequently identified as priorities. So we didn't hear about natural resources during the election, but that is uranium and fracking have become an enormous focus. We didn't hear about university restructuring, but we see a lot of that being rammed through the legislature in our last term. Same with fast-tracking different kinds of approvals. So, what we're hearing from lots of folks is no one's actually talking to us. No one's asking what we want, and no one is sharing what's happening. And so our role as official opposition is to understand how people are feeling, how people are responding to the work of government, and what we might be able to do better. And so that's exactly what we're doing on the ground in communities across the province this summer.
And you kicked off the tour yesterday in Wolfville. How did it go?
We did. It was fantastic. We met at the Wolfville Legion. I spent the day meeting with folks throughout the valley. So we were in Kentville and Canning and Port Williams and Wolfville. And we had standing room only at the Wolfville Legion. I'm not really good at crowds, but probably over 100 people, and it was just a small gathering, really. And people were super engaged. They wanted to talk. We had a bunch of political science students from Acadia, which is always great. We had families and young parents, and we had seniors and people asking about healthcare, people asking about housing, certainly people concerned about uranium, because obviously that's an issue in different areas of the valley. And in general, people just wanting to engage. Agriculture is another big issue. Recently, it's been made clear by the Federation of Agriculture and others that Nova Scotia's farmers have been in the red for 10 years, and the minister couldn't say why. So clearly that's a big issue for a lot of farming families and communities across the valley and other parts of the province. So we had a great opportunity to engage, and it was a real success.
I want to pick you up on something you said. You mentioned about 100 people being there, and you're not good with crowds. I think what you meant was you're not good at estimating how many people were there.
That's right. That's exactly right.
I was going to say, well, because I know you. You are excellent with crowds, my lady. You really are, so no question. I know with interest you're going to have several stops across the province, but none is scheduled as yet in Cumberland. Are we a lost cause for you, or what?
Absolutely not. Absolutely not. With this summer is the launch of the tour, so people are only so engaged throughout the summer, Bill, and so we are going to get to a number of communities this summer, but this tour will continue, and we're certainly going to endeavor to visit every community we possibly can. So Cumberland's absolutely not a lost cause. As you know, I was out your way not long ago, and I'm sure I'll be back before too long.
No, I'm sure you will too. And, we're actually hosting a town hall meeting here on Saturday night. Hope Center is kind of a mini community center, if you will, and we use it for all kinds of things. It's small, and it's small by design. It's an oversized radio studio, in fact. And so we can seat 30 people for an event, but then we record it all. We recorded the video, we record the audio, and while 30 people might be all that get in to be able to ask questions, in the end, the whole world can see and hear what goes on. So maybe someday we'll do the same with you. We'll make that offer to you.
Yeah, that'd be great.
Yeah, I'd love to.
That'd be great.
Now, I suspect you may have had some conversation as well about the very frustrating data breach at Nova Scotia Power. And
Absolutely.
There's a whole bunch of issues about that. When I first heard that you were raising those issues, I thought, you know what, that's a private company, that's not politics. But then I realized they've got their finger in every household in the province, and I'm not a real fan of the company free enterprise operation of the Light and Power Company from the old days. And I, for one, would be quite content to see it taken over by the province, but that's another story. What do you run into with the people's frustrations on maybe being part of that breach?
Well, I think it's important for your listeners to know, because I don't think it was very clear in the information released yesterday by the company, that it now appears that breach may, in fact, impact all customers, and not just all present customers, but all past customers. And this is a huge issue because, as you say, this is a company that has a monopoly. And, of course, people weren't happy with Nova Scotia Power before this. We have bills and rates that continue to go up. We have a company that's missing its renewable energy targets. We're still burning a fair bit of coal in our province. And we don't have reliable power. The power goes out when the wind blows. And so we have huge, huge issues with this company. But this privacy breach is deeply concerning. At the heart of it is the fact that they have social insurance numbers from people across this province, and they've kept them. And in fact, I got a letter from someone today who said, I lived in Nova Scotia during university. I had an account with Nova Scotia Power. And when I moved back 20 years later, they could identify my former account by my social insurance number. Now, in the era we are in, where everyone is vulnerable to that kind of hacking, that is simply unacceptable, and they can't answer the question why they had that. So all Nova Scotians are now eligible for 5 years of credit monitoring from TransUnion, free. I recommend that everyone take an opportunity and sign up for that. And if people don't know how to do that on the computer, they can call the company and they will assist. But this raises huge questions. One is, how are our privacy issues protected? And it turns out not very well by legislation, Bill. So right now, if citizens wanted to take legal action against a company, we don't really have legislation that enables that. So we think that needs to change. And we do need to review the ownership structure of Nova Scotia Power. And whether that means that it becomes public, whether that means that part of it becomes public, whether that means it's a cooperative utility which exists, right across the world in North America, who knows? But the reality is we have a company that's making a lot of money and delivering very poor service, and now has made potentially every single Nova Scotian vulnerable to identity theft. So something really has to change.
Well, as I said, I for one would love to see it go back into public hands, the public ownership, if you will, because I think that something as important as power for heat, for cooking, for everything we use it for, is just wrong that somebody is profiteering with it, and especially the arrangement that they have, where they have a guaranteed profit for their shareholders.
Right.
I mean, there's no guarantee in business anywhere except with Nova Scotia Power, and that's wrong.
That's right.
Now, in a press release, I think yesterday or the last couple of days, you mentioned about the fact that about this business about ownership of Nova Scotia Power and the way it's structured. In fact, your press release said this fall you will make a move to protect Nova Scotians by tabling legislation. So you've been thinking about this for a longer period than you might have hinted with your most recent comment. Are you looking at talking about taking it back under public control?
Well, we introduced a bill, I think for the first time in 2018, actually, Bill, not to take it under public control, but to say we need to study the ownership structure. Because when Nova Scotia Power was privatized by the Tories in the 90s, they actually didn't do any research, and it's widely seen right now that they got a really bad deal for Nova Scotians. So we can't do that again. Whatever changes may happen with this company in the future, we have to work from a place of really understanding all of the risks and benefits and possibilities. But this is a company that is not delivering for Nova Scotians and that has a monopoly on an essential service. So something needs to change, and we will reintroduce that legislation to say it is time for a long, hard look at how we supply power to Nova Scotians.
No, I realize you know this full well, but they have a unique kind of contract, if you will, to run this operation and take the profits that they take, unfortunately. It's cast in stone, you might say, in legislation and so on. So any legislation you produce is going to be extremely disruptive. I say, I cheer you on. I say more power to you. But you realize, of course, that you're going to be inviting the breaking a contract, if you will, and really being disruptive. I think it's worth the doing. But I just want to make sure you know exactly what you're doing here.
Well, I'm not sure about that, Bill. So our legislation, again, is to study the issue. We are not recommending breaking a contract. In fact, when utilities that go through this process of changing ownership structure are generally bought out. So it would be a purchase. It would have to be an agreement between the company. But again, that is not what we are proposing. What we are saying is that we have a utility that isn't working for us. And the interventions that the Houston government has made in the last 5 years have not helped. And if anything, they've made it worse. So they capped the rates, but because of the structure of Nova Scotia Power, that ended up causing them to take on more debt. And when they took on more debt, their credit rating tanked. And when their credit rating tanked, guess who had to lend the money? We did. So it hasn't made things better, it's made things worse. And so these piecemeal attempts to fix things, at least in the way that this government has been doing them, have not produced better results for Nova Scotians, and we need to understand what could. So nothing that we would introduce would be disruptive or challenge the legality of any statutes. It would be to say government needs to take dedicated resources in a finite period of time and tell Nova Scotians how we can make sure that they can get power that is affordable, reliable, green, and where their data won't be compromised.
I second that motion. I really do. Now, I never seem to have enough time to talk with you and get all the topics in. I wanted to talk about the question of environmental racism and a long-awaited report on that was released already, but it hasn't really come out into the public. And your opposition critic, Susie Hansen, is demanding that the Premier open it up and say, what's in this thing? What do you fear might be there?
Well, I think it's imperative that we see it, Bill, because Susie, in fact, introduced the amendment in 2021 that led to the formation of this panel. This panel was all people outside of government who were supposed to study and produce a public report on the ways in which different environmental and industrial projects have created toxic conditions for communities in which they're sited, which often in our province have been African, Nova Scotian, and Indigenous communities. And
no
so
question.
We think of the tar ponds in Sydney. We think of Boat Harbor. We think of Africville and the dump there. This is an undisputable legacy in our province. But why did it happen? And what are we going to do about it? And how can we stop it from happening again? Those are the questions that we took time and money and expertise to study and produce a report on. And now this government refuses to release it, which in and of itself is a problem. But it's a much bigger problem because we're streamlining industrial approvals. We're steamrolling forward with natural resource projects that the public may or may not be on side with. And when we do that, we risk repeating the mistakes of the past unless we have identified what they are and how to avoid them. And so it's really suspicious, frankly, that they won't release this report because it doesn't show any commitment to doing things better as we go forward.
Well, let's face it, environmental racism, that's a harsh term, but it's a fact. And Nova Scotia, This is not a proud time for Nova Scotia to look at themselves and say, look at what we've done over the years. And I think we all have to bow our heads in shame on this one. And to try and, I'm not suggesting the government is sweeping it under the carpet, but to ignore it is wrong. We need to face it. We need to, extend our apologies and ensure that steps are taken that it never, ever happens again. We are all one, not just in Nova Scotia, but in the world. We really are.
Agree.
So you second my motion then?
I do.
As always, a real treat to chat with you. Where are you going on your next stop on the tour?
Oh, it's a good question. I don't have my calendar in front of me, but I'm pretty sure we're going to be in Bridgewater. We'll be in the South Shore. We'll be in Hants County. We'll be back in Cape Breton in August, and a few places in between, Antigonish. So we'll make sure to let folks know.
And of course, I'm going to be on you, like making sure that Cumberland ends up on the stop somewhere, because we've got some certain issues to talk about. And
No doubt.
I've always found you to be you're easy to talk with, which is kind of different, and that's good. And of course, at the same time, very provocative. So I enjoy our conversations.
Me too, Bill. Thanks so much.